And hi, everybody. Well, welcome to this first financial wellbeing session of 2025, where we're going to be talking about how you can give your money a new year makeover. So new year, new you. That's the kind of theme we're going to run with. So just to introduce myself again, but I'm Katie Bye. I'm the head of Better With Money. Now, Better With Money is an independent financial education company, and it's our aim to bring money matters to life in a sort of easy to understand way, help you feel more confident when it comes to managing your money, but also, and most importantly, to help you to build upon your financial resilience as well. So delighted to be back to be able to deliver these sessions for you today. Now, couple of points just to note before we sort of launch into the detail. The webinar is providing information only, so I won't be providing any financial advice today. Instead, I'm just aiming to give you the tools and the knowledge to help you to make your own decisions about your finances. Now, it is important to note that Better With Money is not connected to any other companies or websites that I may mention today. We've also got no products to sell either. So if I do mention companies or websites, it's just because we genuinely believe they offer good services, which you can explore, take advantage of if you wish, but certainly not because we've got any financial incentive to be mentioning them. As Sarah's already mentioned, please do ask any questions as we go. And when we sort of come to the end, we've got some time for the questions that have been asked throughout the session. Now, in terms of what we're going to look to cover, for many people, it's fair to say January is their least favourite month of the year, partly because it can be dark, it can be pretty dismal, but a big reason is that the sort of months when people have had to grapple with that harsh reality that December has probably been a month of overspending. So this is when it tends to come to light. So as a result, sort of January looms into view. Many people know that they're going to face that month of financial struggle and stress, which can even get the most optimistic people down. So given the fact we're sort of in the third week of January, there may be perhaps for some of you some bills that are starting to land that are highlighting that Christmas overspend. So in today's webinar, we're very much going to look at how you can reinvigorate, really kickstart your finances for the year ahead with lots of sort of various practical strategies that will help you set up for a great financial year in front of you. So we're going to have a look at the relationship between money and health. So why it's so important for us to gain greater control over our finances. We are going to look at some key actions that you can do for giving your finances a makeover. And that sort of includes budgeting and opportunities to save, managing debt, but also how you can maximize income to try and combat some of the rising costs of living that we've all been experiencing now for the past few years. And like I said, plenty of time for any questions that you may have as well. So we're going to start by sort of setting the scene and talking a little bit about the link between money and health. It's been well researched that money is one of the biggest causes of stress. And as our worries about money increase, it starts to impact our stress levels. We know that feeling stressed not only can affect our sleep and our personal relationships, but also our ability to concentrate and to do a good job at work as well. And that can then start to negatively impact our overall happiness and health. Now, the Financial Conduct Authority shared some results of their Financial Lives Cost of Living survey for January of this year. And it actually found that 28% of adults are either not coping financially or finding it difficult to cope. And we've got 43% feeling more anxious or stressed due to that cost of living piece. And these challenges are also having an impact on our savings. So with 53% stopping or reducing savings or using their savings to help pay essential bills. And that, of course, then has an impact on the level of savings we may have access to in order to pay for any of those sort of unforeseen costs or those unexpected costs that can happen. And because as a nation, typically we don't like talking about money, It's probably not surprising to see that on average, people tend to struggle for up to 2 years with money and debt problems before seeking help. 85% of them said that the stress about money had actually led to physical or mental illness and time off of work. And we know that having time off of work then adds to that stress because we start to worry you could lose your job, and those money worries could get so much worse. So it's really clear for us to see that there is a link between money and our health. So taking those steps to gain control of our finances really is essential for our overall health and well-being. But the challenge then comes, where do we start? So the first step is all about working out what you want your money to do for you, which means setting your money goals. So thinking, what would you like to do if you had enough money to do it? And a great way to think about your money goals is to think about what you want to achieve in the short term, in the medium term, and then in the long term. Now, a short-term goal is something you need to focus on now or within the sort of next 2 years. So it could be kind of paying off your credit card or not going overdrawn before next payday or a weekend away that you've got coming up. When we think about medium-term goals, we're looking at sort of that next 5 to 10 years. So that might be saving for a house deposit, moving, sort of big home renovations, helping fund sort of send your child to university. But when we think about the long-term goals, that is very much about your future. So anything that's sort of 10 years plus away. And for many, that starts to centre sort of on retirement goals, or if not wishing to stop work altogether, saving enough money to then be able to reduce some of those working hours to spend that time on other things. Now, whatever you're thinking, it's about taking some time to work out what your goals are, because it's that will give you the motivation to manage your finances and, importantly, to give purpose to your money. And not only that, but your approach to achieving those goals will probably be different depending on when you want to achieve them. And we'll talk a bit more about that later on. But in any case, once you know what you're aiming for, then the rest of your money plan can follow at that point. So once we've got our money goals set, sort of step number 2 of the money makeover is about making sure you're spending less than what you earn. And that means just really getting to grips with what life is costing you. And that sort of begins with a well thought out budget. So it's about facing up sort of to the fact that you maybe tend to overspend, perhaps during in December, and counteracting that by creating a budget for this month and for the rest of the year ahead that you can realistically stick to. So it's about outlining the necessary expenses and being mindful of your financial limitations. So having that clear financial roadmap that can then help you avoid any unnecessary stress as you transition sort of throughout the year and overcome some of those financial hurdles and help put you on a good path for the rest of the year ahead. Now, your budget is quite simply the income you've got coming in versus what you have to pay out each month. And the aim is to cover all of your bills and hopefully still have a little bit spare at the end of each month that you can put towards the money goals that we spoke about right at the beginning. Now, for many people, having money left over isn't actually necessarily achievable right now, but it is still about making sure that you've got the knowledge as to how much your life is costing you so that you can then manage your money as best that you can. Now, you certainly don't need anything fancy for budgeting. So you can just use a piece of paper and a pen, or an Excel spreadsheet, whatever you prefer. But there are lots of free tools available online to help you, including a very small snapshot that you can see on the screen from the Better with Money website. You're welcome to access that for free. You just need to go under our employee resources section, and all of our kind of free tools sit there. But most of the high street banks and building societies are now offering budgeting tools within their apps as well. So it's well worth having a look there. But whatever tool or spreadsheet you use to budget, it's really useful to break your spending down into 3 areas. First being essential spend. So that includes things like your rent, mortgage payments, bills, food shop. So they're the monthly costs that are essential to the way that you live. Now, the second is expenditure relating to debt. So looking at things like your loan repayments, car and phone finance. And thirdly, the fun stuff. So it's really important for us to have a look at how much we're spending on things like going out with friends or clothes, takeaways. Certainly in my example, it's those sort of pointless Amazon deliveries that keep coming through, and then it astounds me how much we use sort of Amazon as a household. But I find that sort of going through bank statements line by line, so it's a very old school approach, but it works the best for me, just so that I can get the most accurate picture of my expenditure. So you print off your most recent bank statement, take a highlighter pen and highlight each entry and then record that outgoing in the specific category that I've created on the budget planner. So that way you can't overlook any of those expenses you've forgotten about, or the ones you quite consciously don't want to look at, because sometimes the power of the scroll can mean that we can just bypass those heavy sort of weekends out, that perhaps we don't want an added reminder around. But visibility is key. You know, it's going to give us the greatest understanding of what our financial picture is. And sometimes going back over a couple of months of bank statements can be useful because it can help you get a more accurate picture. It's also important to remember the costs that happen once a year as well. And that brings us on to the importance really of an annual budget. So it's really good practice to sort of jot down some of those key activities, events you've got coming up for the year, divide it by the months that you've got left to help you to understand what perhaps savings requirements you've got in the short term as well. And whilst you're doing that, it's also worth doing a bit of scenario planning and factoring in any costs that you know will be increasing this year. So that might include bills. So if we think about the fact that the energy price cap rose by 1.2%, at the start of this month, for example, you may also be in a position where perhaps your children start school later in the year, or you're planning a holiday. So that all needs to start coming into your thinking. And then once complete, you should be able to see whether you have any surplus money left at the end of the month, which can be saved towards those emergencies or back towards those money goals, or whether you're in a situation where you have a shortfall. And if you do identify a shortfall, it is about trying to be honest with yourself around where it's coming from. Now, my final point just on this slide is around sort of budgeting. And particularly if you're in a relationship and you don't already do it, then it's really beneficial to start the new year, so you mean to go on and book in a money date where you can actually sit down together and discuss these things together. There's sort of lots of research and studies out there at the moment around how sort of a lot of relationship dynamics have shifted and changed. And actually, there's a lot more independence with money than perhaps in a previous sort of setup. Where perhaps somebody stayed home full time to look after children. We're seeing that dynamic has changed. So therefore it can be quite natural for people to start operating their finances very independently as well. That can be a really good thing. But it's also around making that money date to sit down and make sure that both sides are equally as informed around what those household expenditures look like, and full transparency on any debt that may be there as well. Might be easier said than done for some partnerships, but it's really recommended to do that. I'm just going to get through these builds. There we go. Now, part of the budgeting process is to identify if you can cut back on any of your expenditure so that you can free up cash that can be spent or saved sort of elsewhere. So we're going to have a look at some of the ways that you might be able to cut back on those expenditures, and including some sort of hidden opportunities to save as well. So for most of us, one of our biggest bills every month is council tax. So, you know, check and just make sure that you are not overpaying. You're on the right council tax band. There are apparently 400,000 people in England and Scotland that are being overcharged. So I've included a guide for checking your council tax band. Don't forget, if you live by yourself as well, you are entitled to a 25% discount on the usual rate. And also, depending on if there's any registered disabilities, etc., then again, it's worth looking at that. And again, any students as well that may be in the house. Next, if you want to find the cheapest fuel in your area, then you can check out petrolprices.com. So you can set the distance you're prepared to travel to get your fuel. It then tells you all the prices at your local forecourts. And they claim that the average driver can save around £240 a year just by using their website. Now let's look at sort of direct debits. Now, because people waste hundreds of pounds a year paying for products and services they either don't need or they don't really use, things like perhaps magazine subscriptions, gym memberships, dare I say it, Amazon Prime, other subscriptions, now is a really good time to go through those and be quite ruthless, and cancel any unnecessary direct debits or standing orders. Diarise to do that twice a year by sort of checking in your banking app what you've got coming out, whether you still need it or whether you actually want it. But I've also put a link to the Money Saving Expert Guide for doing a direct debit audit. The worst story in my career that I've sort of come across when it comes to sort of unnecessary expenditure was a gentleman that was paying pet insurance for quite a few years after his pet had even sadly passed away. And it's because it was such a small amount that he felt was going out of his bank account, never really gave it a second thought. And it wasn't until he did that sort of direct debit audit that he was like, oh my goodness, I've been paying for this pet insurance years even after I've even had that pet. So it can be quite surprising when you have a look. Can also be the source of lots of arguments in the household. I know from my husband's perspective, there's many occasions where he goes to watch a certain sporting match or something, and suddenly he realizes that he hasn't got access because I've gone through all of the costs and I've removed bits of the package. So, be warned, it can start to cause some arguments, but that's why I suggest making that money date as well if you are in that situation. But I've also listed lots of other kind of websites that will give you some brilliant kind of cost savings initiatives and areas where you can really look to reduce spend as well. Things like online discounts, cashback offers, even using things like honey.com, which is a free internet browser extension that you obviously have to give access to, but it then automatically finds and applies coupon codes at the checkout. So, it saves you having to hunt around for you. And there's some really, really great kind of opportunities. So lots of ideas on the screen there around how you may be able to reduce your sort of monthly outgoings, purely because every penny saved is another, that you can then put towards other things and perhaps something a bit more meaningful as well. Now, I just want to move on to thinking about debt. So, because debt payments can often be one of the biggest sources of spending in a month. So it's worth sort of checking that we're paying it back as efficiently and as cheaply as possible. So with regards to, when we think about debt, interest rates have come back up slightly sort of over the last few years. So you may well have seen sort of the cost of any debt increase as well. The first sort of point is about paying off debts before saving. Now, particularly when the interest rate on the debt is more than what you would be receiving in interest on your savings. So, like I said, while sort of saving interest rates have come up slightly as well over the last few years, it's almost guaranteed that the interest you're going to be paying against some of your debt is going to be more than what you would be earning on having that same amount in savings. And we can see an example here up on the slide where if you had £1,000 on a credit card at 20%, you would be charged £200 in interest a year. Now, that is assuming a constant balance. If you were to have that same £1,000 in savings earning 3%, you would only be getting £30 a year in interest. So you would actually be £170 a year better off by repaying the card, using those savings, and then saving yourself that £200 loss. Now, another really important part of dealing with debt is simply knowing what debt you have. And I appreciate that sounds very obvious, but it can be easy to sort of bury your head in the sand, just let the debt exist in the background. But it's about uncovering those debts, making them visible, gaining that clarity on exactly what they are, how much they're costing, and when they need to be paid back. So listing your debts will help you to have that visual record and help you to start taking control and work out a plan on what you're going to do to attack them. And in general, you should focus on paying off the higher interest debt first. Having sort of completed your budget in an earlier step, you'll have a good idea as to how much you've got left over at the end of each month. And then any of that surplus can then be directed to chunking down those debts. Really important, always pay the minimum payment across all the debts by the date due. But if you have any extra, excuse me, it's then about paying as much as you can against those most expensive debts. And only when they're repaid do you then shift the focus to the next highest rate card and kind of continue in that mentality until you're debt free. Now, it's really important to check the terms and conditions of the finance agreement to make sure that you won't be charged a penalty for overpaying them if that's what you decide to do. But it's also about seeing what opportunities you've got available to you. So if there's any 0% interest, then that's worth exploring. It's far more strategic to obviously borrow money against 0% than what it is to have an APR. But that's very much reliant on your credit score as well. And the better the credit score, the longer that sort of 0% agreement will be that you can get access to. I've put some sort of resources as well down here. Things like Money Helper have got some fantastic sort of guides. You've also got lots of debt charities as well that can help you and support you. Things like National Debt Helpline. If you go on their website, they've got some brilliant resources around sort of, debt management and how to tackle it and how to get that plan in place. But also, let's not forget, even today's session has been hosted by, some amazing benevolent funds. And that's what they're also there for as well in times of hardship. So moving on, it's really important that when we focused on things like sort of cutting costs and looking at debt, January doesn't have to only be about sort of financial constraints. It's also an opportunity to explore additional income streams, considering different ways of supplementing your income, or even something short term that can provide a sort of financial boost and ease that financial stress and pressure. And part of that is also understanding your entitlement to any sort of state benefits and seeking support where you can. So you'll see on the slide that I've sort of signposted various websites that you can go to learn about whether you're sort of entitled to any additional support as well. So, for example, are there any state benefits that you or your family are entitled to that you're not receiving already? So you might be entitled to help if you've got caring responsibilities or a disability or a child with a disability. So the easiest and quickest way to see what you might be entitled to is to go on to Entitled To website, fill out their questionnaire, and it will then tell you whether there's any state benefits that you may be eligible for. You can always reach out to Citizens Advice if you need any help on that front as well. And also, I just wanted to sort of highlight around the changes to child benefit that we saw come in last year. So from the 6th of April back in 2024, the thresholds for child benefit were increased. So it does mean that more people will now be eligible to be applying for child benefit as a result of that increase. So if you or your partner were previously earning above the old threshold, but sort of not over the new higher thresholds, then you may now qualify. So it's worth sort of taking a look at gov.uk, typing child benefit in the search bar and have a look and make that contact because it's really, really important. And you can see some sort of other areas around selling of unwanted items, renting out parking spaces, rent a room sort of schemes and initiatives that are in place as well. Now, we've covered quite a lot. The idea in, sort of quite a small bite-sized session is to really help you to get you thinking about that sort of money makeover action plan, which you can then work through sort of post today's session. So I've sort of just detailed some of those, almost 6 top tips really here. So first of all, think about those money goals. What is it that you want to achieve for this year and beyond? Secondly, sort of put in place that solid plan for your money by reviewing your budget, making those changes, bring it into your conscious thinking. Thirdly, start to identify them from those areas where you're overspending, what you can do to reduce costs. Then moving on, have a look and think of ways that you can maximize your income or you can access further financial support if you're not already. Number 5 on our list is taking that opportunity to sort of review any debt that you have, understanding if there's opportunities where, again, you can cut the cost of some of that debt repayment, or it might be using it strategically and looking for some of those 0% opportunities or those low interest rate loans in order to consolidate that debt in one place and then overpay it to get it chunked down quicker, subject, of course, to any contractual agreements you've got in place. And finally, remember to review it. Money management is ongoing. It's a dynamic process. It's not sort of something we should do at the start of the year and then expect it to take care of itself. It's something that does need that constant review, especially as well as the economic climate will change. Now, don't forget, you do have access to the ICE Benevolent Fund and the IMechE support network. So please do make full use of those fantastic resources. Having supported with the financial education for a number of years now as well, I'm always, completely blown away by the fantastic level of support that both are giving. They are there for you. So please do, visit the website, reach out, have a look, or even additional courses and things that might help you for the year ahead as well. But I think that's enough talking from me. So I'm going to hand back over to Sarah for any questions that we may have.
That's great. Thank you very much, Katie. Lots of really interesting things to think about there. We have a couple of questions. So first of all, if I'm about to lose my job, should I still be paying debts as a priority or should I try and put something aside?
I think it is about prioritization. So with things like sort of, if there's any form of severance that's coming, in losing job, i.e. like redundancy package, it is, the debts are not going to go away, sadly. So it is a commitment that still needs to be maintained. But it's also around just making sure that at minimum, those minimum payments are always being maintained and by the due date, purely because what you don't want is implication that then starts to happen to a credit score. Interestingly, more and more employers moving forward as part of their vetting process will take individuals through a credit scoring, depending on the role, of course. But what you don't want to do is, whilst there is a period of unemployment and you're potentially going to go back into new employment, you don't then want that almost credit history to suddenly compromise opportunities for future employment. Now, it does tend to be financial services organisations, any roles that might have any form of kind of money management associated to them. That tends to be when those credit scores are sort of more applicable. But I have had instances before where employees that have been working in manufacturing have actually turned around and said it really surprised them, that when they went somewhere new, they were actually taken through a sort of screening, and part of that was to actually look at their financial health, as well. And we don't want anyone falling foul of that. So it's really important debt at the minimum payment level is always maintained, but also being sensible about any money that you've got until you get back into employment, when, perhaps any surplus you've got at that point could be used to overpay the debt then.
That's great. And we've just had another question come in. How do we check our credit score without affecting the score?
Yeah, so interestingly, there are some sort of myths that circulate around about that oh, if you look at your credit score, it gets registered and it will compromise the score, and that actually isn't true. So you can look at your credit score as much as you like, and it will not sort of be detrimental to that score. There's some brilliant websites that are out there that you can use. ClearScore, as an example, it's a free app that you can download. You pop in your details. Unfortunately, because it is free, you do get a number of pop-ups and adverts and things that come on, but it is free in order to use, and it will give you an overall picture of not only what your score is, but the reason I like it is it actually breaks down some of the rationale behind that score. So what could you do that would actually help improve? And it will make suggestions like, if you're not on the electoral roll, for example, it will know that, and it will say, by going on the electoral roll and being registered, that would bump it by another 100 points, because it's a way of lenders being able to validate your identity. You are who you say you are, you live where you say you live, etc. So it gives you some sort of hints and tips around your financial resilience as well, for that score. It's also worth looking at your online banking apps if you're using them, because many of the banks and building societies now, as part of your online banking, you can almost go on the three dots, and look at sort of the wider support that exists, and many of them are giving you access to your credit score as well. So if anything, I would encourage everybody to really actively look at your credit score rather than not looking at it being fearful it's going to compromise your score, because it absolutely won't.
That's great. Thank you, Katie. And just one more because I'm aware of the time. If I rent a room out, will I need to know all the new rules that may come into effect for landlords and their tenants?
Yeah, you do need to be careful. Although there is the rent a room scheme that means that you're allowed to earn up to 7,000 a year without any tax implications. You don't need to declare that rental income, anything below 7,000 if you were renting a room. But ultimately, once you bring someone into your property, and you are renting the room out, then you are becoming a form of a landlord. So therefore, you would want to make sure as well that you are not falling foul of any expectations in how you're renting that room, the state of that room, etc. In appropriate insurances. Obviously, take care if you're renting a property, that you're also not then subletting, because that may be very much against the contractual agreement that you have in place for your rented property. But certainly, if you are an owner, you're looking to maximize income. Many people are looking at sort of using furnished accommodation, a room, a sort of renovated garage, in order to bring some money in, keep the rent under 7,000, so then there's no tax implications. But absolutely, it's not a case of, from a health and safety perspective, you're then exempt to anything. You're not. There would be expectations of the condition and so forth of what you're renting, what you are renting out. So yeah, there's a brilliant guide actually. If you go on to, again, Money Helper or even gov.uk, and just Google kind of renting a room, you'll get lots more information and what the expectations are of you as well.